What if everything you thought you knew about the biggest upset in WNBA playoff history was actually a carefully constructed lie? What if the two-time defending champions didn't lose because of bad officiating, but because they finally got caught playing by rules that didn't apply to anyone else? Today, we're going to show you the evidence that's been hiding in plain sight, the pattern of aggression that the league's MVP doesn't want you to see, and the one social media post from an injured player that completely destroys the narrative the Las Vegas Aces have been selling since the moment that final buzzer sounded. This isn't just about basketball. This is about what happens when privilege meets accountability, and the results are absolutely explosive.
There were so many other plays where it felt like A'ja was bullying other players on the Fever, and I want you to watch this play here with Lexi Hall. She's standing her ground, she's trying to down screen, and A'ja just chucks her to the ground. Now, there was no whistle there, and you can see ref number 16 right there. He's watching the whole thing happen. No whistle.
The moment Indiana Fever knocked off the Las Vegas Aces in Game 4, the excuses started flying faster than the basketballs that had just been raining down on the court. But here's what nobody's talking about: the real reason this game has become the most controversial moment of the season, and why one player's forward social media post just changed everything we thought we understood about this series. If you're tired of surface-level sports coverage that just regurgitates press conference quotes without digging into what actually happened, you're in exactly the right place. We're about to take you behind the curtain, frame by frame, call by call, to show you the truth that the mainstream sports media is too afraid to touch. Picture this scene. You're the reigning MVP of the entire league. You've won back-to-back championships. You're considered untouchable, unstoppable, the face of women's basketball. And then, in one night, everything falls apart. But instead of looking in the mirror, instead of acknowledging that maybe, just maybe, you got outplayed, you do what so many champions do when they taste defeat for the first time in years. You find someone else to blame. That's exactly what happened in the post-game press conference that has now been viewed millions of times across social media. A'ja Wilson sat down in front of those microphones and, with dripping sarcasm, delivered a line that was designed to do one thing and one thing only: make you believe she was robbed. "Special whistle," she said, referring to her opponent, Aaliyah Boston. Just 2 words, but they carried the weight of an entire narrative. The message was crystal clear. We didn't lose this game. It was taken from us by biased officials who gave our opponent preferential treatment. But here's where this story gets interesting, because Wilson wasn't alone in pushing this narrative. Her Hall of Fame coach, Becky Hammon, someone who should know better, someone who's been in this game long enough to understand that sometimes you just get beat, she took it even further. When asked about the officiating in her post-game press conference, Hammon's response wasn't analysis. It wasn't measured. It was a declaration of war. They shot 34 free throws and we shot 11. Next question. Let that sink in for a moment.
Certainly felt like a differently officiated game than other parts of the series. I think we had more defensive 3 seconds today than any other part of the playoffs. I just wonder how you felt about the overall flow of the game.
Well, they shot 34 free throws and we shot 11. Next question. I got to go back and look at the tape, but it seemed like there was a lot of grabbing and holding down there. That got called one way.
A championship-level coach, instead of breaking down the tactical adjustments her team failed to make, instead of acknowledging the strategic masterclass that Indiana had just put on display, reduced the entire game to a single statistic: 34-11. That's all you need to know, she seemed to be saying. That number tells you everything about why we lost. Except it doesn't. Not even close. Because when you actually watch the tape, when you break down the film play by play, possession by possession, a completely different story emerges. And that story is about to make a lot of people very uncomfortable. Let's talk about what actually happened in that game. Because the truth is so much more interesting than the victim narrative the Aces have been selling. Indiana Fever came into Game 4 with a game plan that was brilliant in its simplicity. They were going to attack the paint relentlessly. They were going to put the ball in Aaliyah Boston's hands in the post over and over again. And they were going to force the Aces to make a choice: give up easy layups or commit fouls to stop her. It's basketball 101, but it's also incredibly difficult to defend when executed properly. And Boston? She was absolutely surgical in her execution. When asked after the game how she managed to dominate the league's MVP and get to the free throw line 13 times, her answer revealed everything about why Indiana won and why the Aces' complaints are so hollow. She talked about earlier seals, about establishing position before the ball even came to her, about working her defender into impossible situations where they had no choice but to foul. This wasn't about getting favorable calls. This was about strategic dominance. By sealing her defender before catching the ball just feet from the rim, Boston was creating a scenario where the defense was already beaten. From that position, a defender faces an impossible choice: let her score an easy 2 points or foul her and send her to the line. The Aces chose to foul again and again and again. That's not biased officiating. That's the predictable result of one team's strategy completely overwhelming the other's ability to defend it. But if the Aces and their MVP want to complain about the officiating, if they want to talk about special whistles and favorable treatment, then we need to have a very different conversation. Because the evidence of what actually happened throughout this series, the pattern of physical play that was allowed to continue game after game, that's where this story gets really explosive. There's a play from that same Game 4 that perfectly encapsulates the hypocrisy of everything Wilson and Hammon said after the final buzzer. Lexi Hall, a guard for the Fever, is trying to set a routine down screen. It's one of the most basic plays in basketball, something that happens dozens of times in every single game. Hall is standing her ground, establishing position, doing everything by the book. And then watch what happens. Aaliyah Wilson, the same player who would later complain about unfair officiating, approaches Hall, and with both hands extended, she doesn't just bump her or fight for position. She violently shoves Hall to the hardwood floor. It's not incidental contact. It's not two players battling for space. It's a blatant two-handed push that sends a smaller player crashing down. Now here's the kicker. There's a referee standing less than 10 feet away, watching the entire play unfold. The ref's sight line is completely unobstructed. He sees everything. And what happens? Absolutely nothing. No whistle, no call. Play continues as if nothing happened. This is the same player who would sit in front of cameras 30 minutes later and sarcastically suggest that her opponent was getting preferential treatment from the officials. The hypocrisy isn't just stunning, it's the smoking gun that exposes the entire narrative as a manufactured excuse. For 3 games leading up to that moment, Indiana Fever fans and analysts had been pointing out a clear pattern. The Aces were being allowed to play a more physical brand of basketball. They were getting the benefit of the doubt on 50-50 calls. Meanwhile, Indiana was getting whistled for the slightest contact. Game 4 wasn't about the Fever getting favorable treatment. It was about the officials finally calling the game evenly, and the Aces couldn't handle it. But you don't have to take my word for it, because while Wilson was crafting her victim narrative for the media, someone else decided to tell the truth. Sophie Cunningham, a key guard for the Indiana Fever, had been sidelined for the season with a brutal MCL tear. She couldn't play, couldn't defend, couldn't fight for rebounds. But she could watch, and she could speak. And as the media narrative was being hijacked by the Aces' complaints, she picked up her phone and posted something that changed everything. And it's about damn time, Cunningham wrote on social media. I honestly thought the refs did a nice job today on both sides. 4 simple words at the beginning. And it's about damn time. Read that phrase again and think about what it actually means. This isn't a player celebrating favorable calls for her team. This is a player expressing relief that after 3 games of fighting what felt like an uphill battle against both the defending champions and the officiating, her team finally got a fairly called game. That phrase, about damn time, is confirmation of everything we just saw on the tape. It's an insider, someone who had been watching from the bench with a player's eye, publicly validating what so many had been seeing throughout the series. The whistle hadn't been balanced. Game 4 wasn't about Indiana getting special treatment. It was about the officials finally doing their job correctly. Cunningham's post was raw, unfiltered truth from the trenches, and it completely dismantled the narrative that Wilson and Hammon were trying to build. This wasn't biased officiating favoring the underdog. This was a correction for 3 games of imbalance that had favored the champions. And here's where the story reaches its devastating conclusion. Because when you combine Indiana's relentless physical pressure with a fairly called game for the first time in the series, something broke inside the Aces' championship machine. With 30 seconds left in a brutal playoff game, with Indiana clinging to a lead and the Aces desperately needing a miracle, Becky Hammon made a mistake that will haunt her forever. She called a timeout that her team didn't have. The result was a technical foul, a free throw for Indiana, and possession of the ball. It was a self-inflicted wound that ended any hope of a comeback. This wasn't just a simple coaching error. This was the final crack in the dam. the undeniable proof that the combination of Indiana's strategic brilliance and balanced officiating had mentally broken the defending champions. They didn't just lose to the Fever's game plan. They lost to their own frustration, their own inability to adapt when the preferential treatment they'd been receiving suddenly disappeared. Think about what we've just uncovered here. We have video evidence of the league's MVP committing a blatant foul that went uncalled. We have that same player complaining about biased officiating after the game. We have a Hall of Fame coach reducing a tactical defeat to a single misleading statistic. And we have an insider from the winning team confirming that the officiating in Game 4 was actually the fairest it had been all series. When you put all these pieces together, the picture becomes crystal clear. The special whistle narrative was never about justice or fair play. It was a smokescreen, a carefully constructed excuse designed to protect reputations and deflect from the uncomfortable truth that the underdog had simply outworked, outstrategized, and outplayed the champions. A'ja Wilson and the Las Vegas Aces want you to focus on that 34-11 free throw disparity because it's simple, it's easy to understand, and it makes them look like victims. But the real story, the one that actually matters, is about what happens when a team that's been allowed to play by different rules suddenly has to compete on a level playing field. If this deep dive into what really happened has opened your eyes to how sports narratives get manipulated, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells me you want more investigations that go beyond the headlines and show you what's actually happening on the court. The mainstream media will keep feeding you whatever story the biggest names want told, but we're here to show you the evidence, break down the film, and let you decide what's really true. Subscribe and turn on notifications because we're just getting started with content that filters out the noise and gives you the unfiltered truth about the WNBA and women's basketball. The next time you hear a superstar complaining about officiating or a coach blaming the refs for a loss, remember this story. Remember Sophie Cunningham's 4 words? Remember Lexi Hall hitting the floor with no whistle? And remember that sometimes the official story and the real story are two completely different things.